Masechet Baba Kama Daf Kafhe. Nu Mishnah. Shora Mazik B'Shut Hanizak Kesad. What are cases where my ox causes damage? We're talking about damage of keren, unusual activity that my ox does, and it does it in your property, your private property. I am liable. What are such cases? Nagaf, nashach, rabas, ba'at, b'shut rabim mishalem hasi nezek. It doesn't have to be goring specifically, but goring, pushing, biting, squatting, kicking another animal or some property of yours. If it's in the Reshut Harabim, then I have to pay half nezek. I know the question was B'Shut HaNizak, but we're bringing Reshut Harabim because that's the standard case that Torah talks about, and there we know that if it's a short tam, then I only have to pay for half the amount of the damages. However, B'Shut HaNizak, Rabbi Tarfon Omer, nezek shalem. Hachamim omrim, chasi nezek. If my animal gores and does some kind of unusually violent activity with intention to cause damage, and it does it not in Reshut Harabim, but in your private property, then that's a machloket. According to the Bitarfon, I have to pay for the full amount of the damage. There's no difference between Tam and Mu'ad. According to the Bitarfon, the difference between Tam and Mu'ad is only in Reshut Harabim. In Reshut HaNizak, I always pay full amount. Hachamim, however, say, no, half amount. The Bitarfon says that the Reshut HaNizak is the same as Reshut Harabim regarding damage by keren. Now, we're going to try to prove the opinion of the vaHomer from a vaHomer. Amar lehen Rabbi Tarfon, Uma b'mkom shehekel al hashen ve'al haregel b'reshut harabim shehu patur, hechmir alehen b'reshut hanizak l'shalem nezek shalem. Look at the difference between shen and regel, which are lenient in Reshut Harabim, because shen and regel, when an animal causes damage in a normal way, just walking or eating, in Reshut Harabim, I don't have to pay. And yet, in Reshut HaNizak, the shen and regel have to pay a full amount. So we see from here that Reshut HaNizak is more machmir than Reshut Harabim, right? Because just compare shen to shen. At a shen in Reshut Harabim, I don't have to pay anything at all, and shen in Reshut HaNizak, I have to pay a full amount. Therefore, Reshut HaNizak I'm more liable than Reshut Harabim. Now transfer that to keren. Makom shechmir ala keren b'shut harabim l'shalem hasi nezek. And nodin shenachmir ala b'shut hanizak l'shalem nezek shalem. So when I have a more stringent case, which is keren, because how do you know that's more stringent? Because in the Reshut Harabim I have to pay half amount. That's more stringent than shen. Even in the Reshut Harabim, I have to pay for half the damage. So all the more so, I'm going to be more stringent in private property and pay a full amount. All right, because in other words, if we're focusing on the difference between Reshut Harabim and the Reshut HaNizak. We prove from Shen that the Reshut HaNizak is more stringent than the Reshut Harabim. Therefore, transfer that over to keren. In the Reshut Harabim, there I am liable to half nezek. Therefore, the vaHomer teaches that I'm going to be liable to a full amount in the Reshut HaNizak for keren. That's the Bitarfon's opinion. Rabbanan say, no, that logic doesn't work. Amru lo Dayo laba min adin liot kanidon ma b'reshut harabim hasi nezek af b'reshut hanizak hasi nezek. This is an important principle of Dayo. It's sufficient to learn what you're learning from the source to the target. In other words, the target that we're learning to, which is Reshut HaNizak, you can't learn further than what the law was in the source law, which was Reshut Harabim. So the source law is Reshut Harabim, and there keren pays chatzi nezek. And you want to say that Reshut HaNizak is more machmir than the Reshut Harabim. All right, maybe it's more machmir. It's at least as machmir, but you can't extend beyond that. So all I know is that the Reshut Harabim, you have to pay chasi nezek for keren. Okay, then all I can learn from the vaHomer is that the Reshut HaNizak also I would pay at least chasi nezek. But Dayo says I can't learn any more than that. Rabbi Tarfon, you're trying to learn that I have to pay a full amount from keren in the Reshut Harabim, where that's only half amount. You can't extend the vaHomer target further than the source from which you are learning from. All right, that's an important logical principle. So what's the Bitarfon going to say about that? Amar lehen af ani lo adun keren mikeren, ani adun keren meregel. Oh, says, you're right. I'm going to change the order of my argument. Rabbi Tarfon says, I'm not going to compare keren in the Shut HaRabim to keren in the Shut HaNizak. Rather, I'm going to compare keren to regel as follows. So focus on the Shut HaRabim by itself and compare keren or shen and compare shen and regel to keren. In the Shut HaRabim, shen and regel, I don't have to pay anything at all, and keren is more stringent. So we learn from there that keren is more stringent than shen and regel because you have to pay half amount for keren, but nothing for shen and regel. Now that we established that, transfer that over to the Shut HaNizak. Makom shechmir ala shen v'ala regel Shut HaNizak enodin shenachmir bekeren. Therefore, in the Shut HaNizak, where we are stringent and you have to pay a full amount for shen and regel, all the more so, you're going to have to pay a full amount from keren. In other words, we're switching around the focus and order of the argument, and here the argument starts with the fact that keren is more stringent than shen. We see that from the example of the Shut HaRabim. Okay, now that we know that, we go to Shut HaNizak, and you see that shen, you have to pay a full amount, and keren, we already established, is more stringent than shen, so then all the more so, keren, you have to pay a full amount in the Shut HaNizak. And now, I'm not violating Dayo, because I'm learning from shen, and shen I know is already a full amount, and so that's the source, and the target is keren, so I'm not going beyond the source. It seems like a good fix and a much better kal vaHomer by Rabbi Tarfon. But the rabbis answered the same thing. Sorry, amru lo, Dayo la ba min hadin leyot kanidon, ma b'shut HaRabim hasi nezek, a b'shut HaNizak hasi nezek. We still don't buy your kal vaHomer because within the source is still keren in the Shut HaRabim. That's part of the building blocks of your argument, and therefore I'm not going to go beyond the source, one of the building blocks of the source. And you can't just bring me shen, because shen is a different category, and I'm going to compare it to keren. That's its own category. Keren and Shut HaRabim is only half, and therefore all I can derive is that keren and Shut HaNizak is only half, and the fact that you moved around the arguments in your kal vaHomer is not going to help us. We still apply Dayo, even in this case. That's the end of the Mishnah. All right, Gemara is going to elaborate. Rabbi Tarfon let le Dayo. Now, is it true that Rabbi Tarfon denies Dayo? The truth is that in the Mishnah, he did seem to accept what the rabbis say, that it was Dayo, and he fixed his argument. But it seems that Rabbi Tarfon does not take Dayo, at least he doesn't take it to a full extent, and does not apply it as much as the rabbis do. So we ask, how could Rabbi Tarfon deny the principle of Dayo? We see it's actually mentioned in the Torah, the Tanya. Medin kal vaHomer kesad. The Torah wants to actually derive the very method of kal vaHomer from the Torah itself. Is there a kal vaHomer in Torah? This is yes. vaHomer Adonai el Moshe, v'avi hayarok yarak befaneha lo tikalem shivat yamim. Kal vaHomer l'shechina 14 yom. Ela Dayo la ba min hadin leyot kanidon. This is in the story about Miriam complaining against Moshe, and Hashem gets angry and punishes Miriam, and she gets sarat, and she's kicked out of the machaneh. And Moshe prays for her, el narefa na'ala. Now, how long should she be sent into exile? So here Hashem tells Moshe, in a case, we don't know, right? We don't know this law. So Hashem says, look, we could derive it. If a father spits in the face of his daughter, meaning a daughter does something wrong, and a father shames her, right? An official shaming. So she is sent out of the house for 7 days. This seems to have been a standard practice, 7 days. So, and then she can come back in. Now, this is the source. Now, how should this apply to Hashem getting angry at someone? It seems that Hashem is much greater, and the honor due to Him is so much more, so it should be, I don't know how many times more. Let's say double. And therefore, she should be out of the camp for at least 14 days. But that's not what happens. She's sent out of the camp for only 7 days because Dayo. This is a limitation on kal vaHomer, even though it seems morally in principle you should extend it even beyond the source, but you're not allowed to. Kal vaHomer says you can only learn the target to be as severe as the source. The source for a father is 7 days, and therefore even for Hashem, it's only going to be 7 days. So you see there's an example right there in the Torah of this limitation on vaHomer. So the Bitarfon should agree with it. And we answer, Kilet le Dayo, when we say that Bitarfon denies the principle of Dayo, that's not across the board, only in some cases. Hecha de mifrich vaHomer. That's only it's only in case where when you apply the Dayo, the vaHomer will fall away completely and will be completely ineffective. If it's going to break the vaHomer, then you don't apply Dayo. However, but if the vaHomer is effective, you learn something from the vaHomer, even with the limitation of Dayo, then he does apply the limitation of Dayo. For example, in this case, Hatam Shiva de Shechina la Ketibe. Ata vaHomer aite arbesar, ata Dayo apik Shiva ve'oke Shiva. In the case of Miriam, we don't know the law about Shechina getting angry at someone, right? There's no precedent for this. There's no law about it. So all we know is that there would be 0 days would be the punishment for Hashem getting angry at someone. And therefore, the vaHomer comes and says, well, we can learn from a father, an honor due to a father is less than that due to Hashem, and a father would be 7 days, so vaHomer, in principle, would teach 14 days, but the Dayo comes and says, no, look, you can't extend it farther than the source, and therefore only 7 days, and now we have 7 days. So the vaHomer is effective. The vaHomer took us from 0 to 7, right? Even after we applied the Dayo, otherwise we would have had 14. Okay, we'll apply the Dayo, we still have 7, so the vaHomer gives us more than we would have had without the vaHomer. So in a case where applying Dayo does not destroy the vaHomer, even the Bitarfon would apply Dayo. But let's say it would destroy the vaHomer, then he doesn't. Like this, like in our Mishnah, Aval hacha hasi nezek ketib, ve'ata vaHomer ve'ite hasi nezek acharina ve'na'aseh nezek shalem, idarash Dayo ifrich le vaHomer. Here, that's half nezek is already said regarding goring. We know that goring is going to pay at least half. That's true in the Shut HaRabim, and so that's going to be true in the Shut HaNizak. You don't need any special derivation that the owner of the damaging act has to pay half. Now, the vaHomer that we're trying to bring is that because, look, at Shen, comparing it to Shen in the Shut HaNizak, you know what? The vaHomer is going to add another half, and he has to pay a full amount. Now, if you want to apply Dayo, so now you're going to take it from the full amount down to Chasi Nezek. But we already knew Chasi Nezek, and therefore you're destroying the vaHomer altogether. Here, if you apply Dayo, then the vaHomer is completely ineffective. This is a case where the Bitarfon says, no, the vaHomer has to do something. And if by applying Dayo, you're going to ruin the vaHomer, then I disagree with Dayo in that case. Apply the vaHomer, and you have to pay the full amount. All right, that sounds like a good argument. What's Rabbanan going to say about that? Rabbanan, Shibat Shechina Ketibe, Tisager Shibat Yamim. The rabbis say, no, actually, we're starting off with a minimum. It's not like we know 0 for Shechina. For Shechina it says she should be sent away for 7 days. That is in fact about Shechina. So we already know that, and then we apply the vaHomer anyway. And the Dayo, we also apply. And so, therefore, you see that we apply Dayo, even though the vaHomer is not extending it past what we already know. Still, you apply Dayo, so you see from here that the rabbis apply Dayo, even when the vaHomer is not going to add anything else, but you're just saying, well, okay, fine, it'll be equal to what we already have. Rabbi Tarfon, Ahuti Sager the Dashinan Dayohu. Rabbi Tarfon says that pasuk of Tisager Shibat Yamim. No, that's where we learned the Dayo in the first place, that it was 0. Oh, Tisager Shibat Yamim. Oh, now we'll know that it shouldn't be 14, but only 7. That's why I need Tisager, because otherwise it would be 0. So we'll go back to Rabbanan. How do you know that it should be already at least 7 for Shechina? V'Rabbanan, Ketiv Kera Acharina, Tisager Miriam. There's another pasuk later on that says, and Miriam in fact went and was out of the camp for 7 days. So that's an extra pasuk. So you see from that extra pasuk that Rabbanan say, that's how we know that there's a standard law already for Shekhinah that's going to be 7 days, and then we try to bring Kal vaHomer to extend it to 14 days, Dayo comes and brings it back down to 7, and so therefore, according to Rabbanan, we already knew 7, the Kal vaHomer with Dayo doesn't add anything else, but still we apply Dayo. Rabbi Tarfon, what's Rabbi Tarfon going to do with those extra words? Oh, we need the extra words to say not only in this case do we apply Dayo, but even in other cases. I might have thought here, because of the honor of Moshe. Moshe prayed for Miriam, right? So we might think because of the honor of Moshe, that's why we're limiting it from 14 down to 7, and we're applying Dayo. But maybe in another case where we don't have that consideration, then we would not apply Dayo at all. And therefore, we have this extra pasuk to teach us that this is true in general, that we will apply Dayo, and we're going to go from 14 down to 7, but still, we're only going to apply Dayo if the Kal vaHomer is effective, even though we apply it, because otherwise we had 0, fine, you have at least 7, all right, then I won't take it to 14. But if the Kal vaHomer is not going to teach anything by applying Dayo, then Rabbi Tarfon says, I will not apply Dayo. Now that we know that Rabbi Tarfon does sometimes apply Dayo, we want to see, is there anyone who never applies Dayo, who would say you can make a Kal vaHomer and extends beyond it no matter what, in all cases? Amar le Rav Papa l'Abaye, veha haytana de la darish Dayo, v'afagav de la mafrich Kal vaHomer. Rav Papa tells Abaye, I found a Tana that does not apply Dayo, even if by applying Dayo, the Kal vaHomer would still be effective. Nevertheless, even though you could still learn something, even with Dayo, he doesn't apply Dayo. So, in the example above, regarding Miriam, this Tana that we're going to introduce would say, you do not apply Dayo no matter what, even if you wouldn't know anything without a Kal vaHomer. And the Kal vaHomer takes you from 0 to 7. But really, you could say it should be 14, because all the more so are Hashem's honor. And so this Tana would say, yes, go all the way to 14. Even though if you apply Dayo, you still learn something. And nevertheless, that doesn't stop us. And you can apply Dayo even beyond the source in all cases. So, who is this Tana? It is the author of the following Baraita, the Tanya. Keri bezav minayin, v'dinhu, ma tahor betahor tameh betameh. Tameh betahor enodin she'eh tameh betameh. We need a little background to understand this Kal vaHomer. Various fluids that are discharged from a person cause different levels of tum'ah. The highest level is zav. This is some kind of gonorrhea-like disease, and if this fluid that comes from a person's man's private member, that's a pus-like substance, if someone touches or carries it, they become tameh. So this is very toxic. This is the most toxic. That's zav. Now, next level after that is keri. Keri fluid, semen. If someone touches it, they become tameh. But if someone carries it, they do not become tameh. We're talking about carrying without touching. Like you're carrying it on top of something, then you lift up that thing underneath and carry it. If it's zav fluid, the one carrying it becomes tameh. Keri fluid, that person does not become tameh. The last thing we're going to talk about is spit. Spit, if it's a tahor person spits, spit is tahor. However, if someone becomes a zav and then spits, that spit has a high level of toxicity and will cause someone who touches it or carries it to be tameh, which is pretty amazing that a zav status can actually change the toxicity of someone's spit to a highest level. Okay, so now we're asking about keri in a zav. If someone becomes a zav and then they see they have a keri emission, what is the status of that keri emission? Is it tameh at all? Is it tameh to only touch? Is it tameh for someone who carries it? Well, we're going to learn from a Kal vaHomer that is the highest level as follows: V'dinhu. We have a Kal vaHomer. If spit, which is tahor in a tahor person, a regular tahor person that spits, the spit has no impurity, and yet spit, if it occurs in a tameh person, a zav, then the spit itself imparts tum'ah. So spit, which is tahor in a tahor person, and yet is tameh in someone tameh by zav, then compare that to keri. keri is tameh for a tahor person. A tahor person that sees keri, that keri imparts tum'ah. All the more so that keri seen by a tameh zav, all the more so will be tameh. And we're going to go beyond and say that not only tameh by touching, but even carrying. This Tana is extending this kal vachomer beyond the source. The source is tumat keri for a tahor person that sees keri. That fluid itself causes tumah only by touching. And yet, we're going to compare that, well, since spit, which is normally totally tahor, and if a zav sees it, it's totally tameh, even by carrying, then all the more so, keri, which is normally somewhat tameh by touching, all the more so, right, if spit becomes tameh even for carrying, then all the more so keri should be tameh to impart tumah even by carrying, if it comes out of a zav. Okay, so you see here that we are not applying dayo. We're going beyond the source and extending the tumah level of keri all the way to even carrying. Now, why are we extending it so far? Why don't we say that the kal vachomer can only teach us that a zav who has keri, that keri only imparts tum'ah for someone who touches it, but we should apply dayo and exclude masa. How do you know that you can extend it so far even for carrying? So if you apply dayo, then you would not learn the kal vachomer even to masa. So you see that the author of this baraita will apply a kal vachomer and he will go all the way. The conclusion can even go beyond the source. He does not apply dayo. So this seems to be a good candidate. However, and maybe you'll say, wait a second, I don't need a kal vachomer that to teach me that a zav that sees keri, that keri will cause tumah by touching, because it shouldn't be any less than a regular tahor person. In other words, and this would be a case where if you apply dayo, then that will break the kal vachomer altogether. And that's why he does not apply dayo. Because even without any kal vachomer, I would know a tahor person who sees keri, that keri imparts tumah by touching. So, for sure, right, that would be the same. This is still tumat keri, even if it's by a zav. Zav also, I don't need a kal vachomer to teach me that a zav who sees keri is going to impart tumah by touching. So the kal vachomer, the only thing it's adding to it is that a zav who sees keri, that keri will be tameh by carrying, right? That's the only thing that the kal vachomer is adding, and that's why it does not apply a dayo here. But if in some cases he may apply dayo. So if you say that, I will say not so. In fact, I need the kal vachomer even for the first step, because מי שקריו גורם לו, יעשה זה שאין קריו גורם לו, אלא דבר אחר גרם לו, כמשמע לן. I might have thought, without the kal vachomer, that a pasuk in Devarim that talks about someone who becomes not clean because of mikirei laila, something happens to at night. So it happens to him at night, so it's talking about a baal keri. So I might think that this pasuk says that only someone who becomes tameh because he saw keri, then that person, that keri, becomes tameh for someone that touches it. But maybe this pasuk, since it says only amikere laila, it's excluding someone that is not his keri that caused him to be tameh, but rather something else, meaning a zav. And therefore, I actually might have thought that a zav who sees keri, that keri may be not tameh at all, which would be quite a paradox that a tahor person, his keri causes tumah touching. A zav, his keri does not cause tumah at all. Well, you might have thought that, and that's why I need the kal vachomer to teach me even the first step, that a keri of a zav has any tumah at all, for that imparts tumah by touching, and so I would need the kal vachomer for that. And yet, this kal vachomer is going to extend even further, that not only is the keri of a zav tameh by touching, it also tameh for carrying, right? Kamash Malan, it teaches us that. And so, therefore, you see that this is, in fact, the author of this baraita does extend a vaHomer 2 steps and does not apply Dayo at all. So here you go. He is a good candidate, but then in the end we reject this. When the pasuk says, right, someone who because he's keri because mikere laila, it doesn't say only if you saw keri because of you're only a tameh because you're bal keri, but not because of something else. It doesn't say and not something else. Pasuk doesn't say that. We added those words in here in our interpretation, and therefore that's not even that's not a likely interpretation. Nobody would have thought that. Rather, we can assume that keri that anyone sees is always going to part tum'ah by touching, and you don't need a vaHomer or any learning from that keri of a zav has the first level of tum'ah. The vaHomer in this case is only comes to teach us that we're upgrading the keri of a zav up to imparting tum'ah by carrying, and therefore, if we apply dayo, then it would break the vaHomer altogether, and that's why this Tana does not apply dayo. So really, this Tana is the same as a bitarfon, that he'll apply dayo sometimes if you could learn something from it, but he will not apply it if it's going to break the vaHomer altogether. So there you go. In the end, we do not have a Tana that will never apply dayo. Even this Tana only applies it. Only does not apply it here because otherwise it would not learn anything at all. Okay, now once we brought up this baraita, we ask who's the author. Uman Tana d'shmat le d'amar shichvat zera shel zav metameh b'masa. Who in fact is the author of this baraita that thinks that the keri of a zav imparts tum'ah even by carrying. Lo to be Eliyahu A, lo to be Yoshua. It can't be either of these two Tanaim. Tanan, even though it says Tanan, is actually a baraita. Shichvat zera shel zav metameh b'maga ve'en metameh b'masad. Rabbi Eliyahu A says quite explicitly that the keri of a zav imparts tum'ah by touching, but not by carrying. So certainly not him. Rabbi Yoshua says that a zav who sees keri, that fluid will cause tum'ah, even for carrying, but only because it's impossible that there isn't mixed up within that keri some drops of zav also, of ziva fluid. So what do we see from Rabbi Yoshua? Adkon lo kama Rabbi Yoshua hatam ela she'efshar velo sichsuche ziva. The only reason why he says that fluid that comes from a person that's bal keri is we only consider it tameh by carrying only because there are drops of ziva substance in it. Halav hachi la. But if not, if we could know for sure that there was no mixture in it, it was only keri substance, then it would not be tameh by masa. So in principle, Rabbi Yoshua does not agree with that either. So who is the Tana of the Braita above that learned that vaHomer? Elahai Tanahu Ditnan. It must be the author of the following Braita that says from Mesechet Kilayim. It's listing various levels of impurity, and before this in the Braita, it talks about impurity of sheretz and keri, so lower levels, and then it says Lema'ala mehen. More impure than those is zovo shel zav, the fluid that is excreted by a zav, viruko, and the spit of a zav, v'shichvat zar'o, and the keri of a zav, u'memei raglav, his urine, v'dam hanida, and blood from a nida, v'tamein ben b'maga ben b'masa, those cause tum'ah both by touching and by carrying. So you see that it mentions shichvat zera of a zav, and that is the highest level of tum'ah. So there you go. The author of this Mishnah would be the author of the Braita above. Ve'dilma hachi nameh. And maybe you'll say that here too, the only reason that the Tana of this Mishnah includes Shichvat Zera is like Rabbi Yoshua said, that maybe there's mixed up within it some drops of ziva fluid. That's the only reason why it's on this list. But really, if it was pure keri, then it would not impart by carrying. And maybe he thinks that also. No, imken litneye gabe zovo, ma'ishena dekatane la gabe ruko, ela mishum date meruko. So now that can't be, because look at the order of things, right? If the shichvat zera was only tameh b'masa, because it's mixed up with some drops of ziva, then it should have listed this right after ziva. It should have said zovo shel zav v'shichvat zaro, because there is some zovo shel zav within that. And so why would you put rok in between? Must be that the reason for shichvat zaro is actually because of ruko. What's the connection? The vaHomer that Braita said, that we learned from ruko, since spit, which is totally tahor usually, becomes the highest level of tumah zav, and we learn from there that shichvat zera also becomes the highest level of tumah in a zav. And so from the order of the items mentioned here, it's obvious that shichvat zera is in and of itself a high level of tumah, and not only because there's some ziva fluid mixed into it. This is quite interesting because we're quoting a Mishnah. Usually Mishnah does not give its source, right? There's Midrash Halacha, which tells you where the source of Halacha is from the Torah. And the Mishnah just gives a list. However, just a codified bottom line law. However, you see here that even within the Mishnah, there's often a hint of where the law derives from. Just even from the order, the structure of the Mishnah, you can tell where it comes from. And here, if shichvat zera was learned from ziva, because the stuff mixed in, then it would have been after it. So even the list here, ruko and shichvat zera, this coming after spit, is a hint to the original vaHomer derivation. So you see that the Mishnah assumes the knowledge of that midrash halacha. Amar le Rav Acha medifti le Ravina. Vaha haytana la darish dayo v'af agav de lo mafrich ka vaHomer. Rav Acha tells Ravina, okay, I have another candidate. The following Tana does not apply dayo in any case, even if the vaHomer would still work and would not be broken by applying dayo, he still does not apply dayo. Well, who is this Tana? The Tanya. Mapas bamet minayin. The question is regarding a mat, this kind of a soft mat. Can it become tameh lamet if it is in a tent or touches a dead body? Now, the general rule of tum'at met is that only something that's a vessel, including clothing, a shirt, pants, those things can become tameh lamet. But a mat is not a vessel. It can't hold anything. It's not, it's useful, I guess, for stepping on. But it's not a garment. It's not called a vessel. So normally, a mapatz will not receive tum'ah. But we're going to learn from a vaHomer that it does. Ve'edin hu. Uma pachin ketanim shetehorin bezav, metameh bamet, mapas shemittameh bezav, enodin sheyitameh bamet. If you have a small clay vessels, they cannot become tahor, but they cannot become tameh from a zav. Why not? A very small clay vessels in general, only become tameh if some tum'ah goes inside them, not if someone touches it from the outside. Now, a very small vessel, these would be used for perfume, so with a very small opening so it does not diffuse. A zav cannot make it tameh because a zav would have to put his finger inside, and the opening is too small for a finger to fit inside. And now, although a zav can make things tameh by moving, carrying something, that doesn't work by a zav, because a zav can only make something tameh by carrying if he could also make it tameh by touching. And so since the small vessel, he can't make it tameh by touching because it doesn't get tumah from the outside, and he can't fit his finger inside. Therefore, a zav cannot make the small clay vessel tameh at all. Yet, a small clay vessel can become tameh lamet. If it's under a roof with a corpse, then that air space enters even into the small opening of the vessel, no matter how small it is. And so that's the so here we go. Pachim ketanim, zav cannot make it tameh, but met can make it tameh. then this mat, which can become tameh from a zav. How? A zav can sit on it. Special law, and things that are made to sit on, if a zav sits on it, it becomes tameh. So all the more so, it should become tameh la met. So in other words, tumat met is more stringent than zav, and since a zav can make a mat tameh, all the more so, roof impurity from with the corpse can make a mat tameh. Okay, that's the vaHomer. Now this Tana v'kaimaitela ben tumat erev ben tumat shiv'ah. This Tana is deriving it even beyond its source, because when a zav makes something tameh, that item is tameh only for one day. Just you put it in the mikveh, and that night it's already tahor. Whereas if something becomes tameh from corpse impurity, then it's tameh for 7 days. So if the zav sits on the mat's only going to become tameh for 1 day. So really, we can logically learn is that the mat, if it's in the roof, if it's in the same room, under the same roof as a corpse, it should be really only for 1 day. Yet this Tana is using this vaHomer beyond that and extending the target to that the mat becomes tameh for all 7 days. Now, how can he do that? Why don't we say that this vaHomer can only teach us that, we thought the mat would not be tameh at all, 0 from tumat met, and so the vaHomer is effective to tell me that, it does become tameh for 1 day. But the Dayo will limit it and say, you can't learn more than 1 day because the source from zav was only 1 day, and so you can't go more than that. And yet, look at this Tana, does not apply Dayo, and says you learn 2 steps, not only from 0 to 1 night, but from even from 1 night to 7 nights, 7 days, and therefore you see that here we have a candidate, a Tana, who does not apply Dayo at all, and he'll even learn right way beyond the original source, as in this case. Amar le kevade mani hale Rab Nachman beZechariah Abaye. And so Ravina told Rabacha, not a good candidate, I don't accept it. This source was already brought up to Rab Nachman beZechariah, by Rab Nachman beZechariah to Abaye. Amar le Abaye, and Abaye already re-explained it and said, no, this you got the source wrong. This Tana never said what you said. Rather, here's a modified version. This modified version of the derivation is going to be a 2-step punch. We're going to first make a vaHomer and then a gezerah shava, and only learn the mat from corpse impurity after the gezerah shava. So here's how it goes. Tana mimapas basheres maitila. The Tana was not comparing the mat to the mat of corpse impurity, to a zav, but rather a mat that touched a sheretz is what he's learning from zav, which is closer together. It's only sheretz only causes impurity just for 1 day. How do you know that a creepy crawly that touches a mat will make it tameh, even though it's not a vessel? So we might have thought that it would not become tameh. If you have these small vessels that a zav can't make it tameh because he can't stick his finger inside, but a sheretz, it could be a small sheretz or a small piece of a sheretz, even a tiny piece of a sheretz, if it causes tumat sheretz, and that can go inside the small opening of these small vessels, and so can become sheretz can make it tameh. So mapas that it does receive tum'ah by a zav because the zav can sit on it. All the more so, a sheretz should make a mat tameh. In other words, we see from the first half that sheretz is more stringent than zav because a sheretz can make small vessels tameh and a zav can't. So if a zav can make a mat tameh and sheretz is more stringent, then also all the more so sheretz can make a zav tameh. Good. Now all that is still just 1 day, so that's a fine vaHomer, and you don't need any stretches and Dayo. That's everybody would agree with this vaHomer. Ela mapas bamet minayin. But now we want to go to the next step and say, hold on, how do you know that a corpse impurity can make a mapas tameh. Ne'emar beged ve'or b'sheres. Ne'emar beged ve'or b'met. Ma beged ve'or hamor b'sheres mapas tameh bo. Haf beged ve'or hamor b'met mapas tameh lo. This is from a Gezer HaShavah. It says the word beged and or regarding sheres. In Vayikra, and it says the same phrase, beged and or, regarding tumat met in Bemidbar. And so just like regarding sheretz, that sheretz can make a mat tameh, as we just proved from the vaHomer. And so we'll use the conduit of the Gezer HaShavah to teach us that also a mat can become tameh by tumat met, by being under a roof with it. Okay, good. Now, so that's the derivation. So you see that this derivation does not require not applying Dayo. It has nothing to do with that. We're actually not even learning it from a vaHomer. vaHomer is only for the first step, and that's a simple one. And we're actually learning from a Gezer HaShavah. Now, we're going to ask at the end of this sugya whether in a Gezer HaShavah can the target be more than the source. We'll get to that in a minute. But first we have to wonder, mufneh, are these pesukim extra? It has to be that they're extra. The ilah mufneh ika lemifrach. The rule is, again, with the Gezer HaShavah, that if there's a way to refute the Gezer HaShavah, there's something different about the analogy, then you can refute it unless the words are extra. They're not needed for their context. If you need the words for their context, then that's a weak Gezer HaShavah and can be easily broken. And now, in this one, can be broken by the following argument, and therefore we're going to need at least one of the two to be free terms. So here's the challenge. You might say sheretz is more stringent because a sheretz can cause tum'ah even if it's a tiny piece the size of a lentil. That's why it can fit down the shaft of that little clay jar. And so the sheretz is machmir because even the lentil size can cause tumah, and maybe that's why it's more machmir and can cause a mat to become tameh. But we can't make an analogy from that to tumat met, because tumat met only makes something tameh if it's in size of an olive, a piece of a bone that's the size of an olive, and therefore is required to make tent impurity. And therefore, this is not you can't learn one from the other. You see, a Gezer HaShavah is also an analogy. It's not just that the same words appear in both places. It has to be a conceptual analogy as well. And so here, the conceptual analogy would be problematic. And so we affirm that indeed it is extra. La'e afnuye mufne mikadi sheres itkash l'shichvat zera tichtib o ish asher teseh v'gomer usmich le o ish asher yiga bechol sheres uchtiv be b'shichvat zera v'chol beged v'chol or asher yeh alav shichvat zara. So indeed this phrase up here, beged and or, that said regarding sheretz is extra because these laws are all attached to each other in these pesukim. This is going to come up yet again, so it's worth looking at now. A person who is sarua or zav cannot eat korban because he is not tahor. Anyone who is tameh the nefesh or shichvat zera or touches a sheretz or a person. So you see that this is listing all different types of tum'ah, including zav and sheres and tumat met. So therefore you see here, they are all connected to each other. And now knowing that, and knowing also that the words beged v'chol or also is said regarding shichvat zera. Therefore, since beged and or is said regarding shichvat zera, and shichvat zera is connected to sheretz, I do not need the words beged and or at sheretz in order to teach me that sheretz can make cloth and leather tameh, because I would know it from the connection to shichvat zera where those words already appear. And therefore, beged ve'or dichtib l'chaman b'sheretz lamalish v'amina lafnuye. Why does the pasuk have to say beged and or regarding sheretz if I already know it, since it's connected to shichvat zera? It must be that those words are extra. Good. Yeah, but there, the Gezer HaShavah is open-ended only on one side. So that we're so far so good according to the opinion that says as long as one of the terms is free, that makes it a strong gezerah shava and cannot be refuted. But that's only one opinion. There's another opinion that says, no, it's not good enough if only one of us is free. Both of them have to be free in order to be a foolproof gezerah shava, and if only one is free, then you can refute it. So now we have to prove that the other side is also free. Indeed, that bigger than or that's said regarding tumat met is also free. In the Pesukim we just saw, it also mentions tumat met, and so that has a kesh. It's juxtaposed with shichvat zera. Dichtiv anogeh b'chol temeh nefesh o ish asher tiseh mimenu v'gomer. Uchtibeh b'shichvat zera v'chol beged v'chol or asher yeh alav shichvat zera. Beged ve'od דכתב לחמנה באמת למלי שמאמינה לפנויה והווה מופנה משני צדדין. Since those Pesukim talk about tumat met right next to shichvat zera, and regarding shichvat zera, as we just saw, it says the same phrase called beged v'chol or. And so therefore I know that beged and or can become tameh with tumat met from its connection here with shichvat zera. So therefore the phrase beged and or that said regarding tumat met is extra. What do I need it for? Oh, this is extra so that we can learn this gezerah shava. And in fact, both terms of the gezerah shava are extra, and therefore it's foolproof and cannot be refuted. All right, almost there. That gezerah shava is good according to the opinion that says when you make a gezerah shava, you take the source from which you learn and you move it to the target that you are going to learn to, and you judge it according to the destination target. Which would mean in this case, we are trying to figure out that a mat. We know that a mat is tameh by a sheretz. We learned that from a vaHomer. So now we know that. And now that sheretz, what touches a mat, that's only going to be tameh for one day. And we use a gezerah shava to take that source, sheretz by a mat, and transfer it to say that a mat also becomes tameh, tumat met. Now, in the context of tumat met, something that is tameh lamet is for 7 days. So there is one opinion that says, when you learn something, don mina, when you interpret it, you put it in its new place. And now that it's in a new place, it gets the laws of the new place of the target, and so a mat will become tameh for 7 days, and so this whole derivation works just fine. However, there is another opinion about the way gezerah shava works. This is kind of the equivalent of Dayo for vaHomer, but this is for gezerah shava. Don mina umina. The other opinion says you infer from the source, but you leave the context of the source, and so yes, you're applying that one item to tumat met. In this case, it would mean we know that a mat can become tameh for one night regarding sheretz. Okay, gezerah shava is going to teach me that original law is true for tumat met also, but we can only learn from the gezerah shava that if a mat becomes tameh l'tumat met, it's only tameh for 1 day. So then, how are we going to learn that it's a mat that becomes tameh l'tumat met is for 7 days? Amar Rava, Amar Kera, v'chibastem bigdechem bayom hashiv'i. Kol tumot she'atem mitamein bamet lo yehu pechutin mishiba. Even that opinion that says a gezerah shava is more limited in that way, still we have a pasuk that tells us that anything that becomes tameh lamet is going to be for 7 days, because the pasuk says, and you will wash your garments on the 7th day. And this means any garment that becomes tameh lamet is going to be tameh all the way up until the 7th day, no matter what. There's no exceptions. Tumat met, that's just part of the very definition of tumat met, is that it's going to last 7 days. So even though this by itself is not necessarily warranted from the gezerah shava, but this is a special law regarding tumat met that it does apply all 7 days. So in sum, we tried to bring a number of sages that would not apply Dayo ever. Rabbanan apply Dayo all the time. Rabbi Tarfon applied Dayo only if the Gezerah Shavah still teaches us something. But he will not apply Dayo if otherwise the Gezerah Shavah would be broken. We were looking for a Tana. Is there any Tana that would not apply Dayo at all? And even if the Gezerah Shavah would not be broken, and you could learn something Gezerah Shavah, still you don't apply Dayo and you go beyond the source. And we tried a couple of Tanaim, but in the end, there is no Tana that will never apply Dayo. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.